Good afternoon, New York. Hello, CoinGeek. My name is Patrick Prinz, and I'm the Europe and Operations Manager of the Bitcoin Association. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the next panel. It's on digital asset investments, real utility, real value. We're here live from the new headquarters of the Bitcoin Association out of Zug, the crypto valley in Switzerland. I'm excited because we have 4 excellent panelists with extensive experience dealing with investors in the digital asset space. And they are dealing both with retail and qualified investors. And my very own professional background is on the sell side and on the buy side. So I'm particularly looking forward to exchanging perspectives and learning from 4 of the great speakers here. So we welcome back on stage in New York, David Ryder, who we have just heard, the Director and Lead Digital Asset Strategist at Fundstrat Global Advisors. Also in New York, we have Joshua Lim. He's the Head of Derivatives at Genesis Global Trading. From Toronto, Canada, we have Stéphane Ouellette, CEO and co-founder of FRNT Financial. And with me here in Zug is Luca from Wyttenbach, who is representing institutional services and products at Bitcoin Suisse. Gentlemen, welcome. As we've just heard from David in his prior presentation, I will jump right into it and invite our 3 other panelists to give a quick introduction of their company and tell us how you engage with investors. Would you like to start, Joshua?
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Joshua Lim. I work as the head of derivatives trading at Genesis Global Trading. Our firm is focused on providing sort of institutional level services for asset managers, for companies in the space, and you know, our set of products is sort of intended to import a lot of the ideas that you have in traditional markets into crypto. So you know, a lot of what we do, it revolves around providing liquidity, spot trading, and derivatives, as well as financing and providing funding to our counterparties.
Stéphane?
Great, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, very similar to what Josh described. At FRNT, our goal is to increase institutional participation in crypto trading generally. And for us, that focus tends to center around generalist asset managers, hedge fund managers, the idea that ultimately we would make crypto an asset class that they trade as easily as they would equities or fixed income, and they'll get morning calls on such products, et cetera. And we do this ultimately through offering cash-settled swap-style products. We trade crypto blocks. We offer treasury management services and general advisory. And we generally focus more on the alpha generation side. So while much of the pitch in crypto is very beta, buy and hold, we find a lot of market inefficiencies in the space, and that's what we're really looking to pitch to our customers. In terms of our BSV participation, I think we're one of the largest BSV traders, that we know of, both for internally and for clients and for client transactions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Luca, do you want to tell us more about what Bitcoin Suisse does and how you personally engaged with investors?
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. So from our side, Bitcoin Suisse, I'm working in the institutional services department to support institutional investors on tailor-made solutions that we're offering for them on the demand side. On top of that, Bitcoin Suisse was founded in 2013 by Nicholas Nicolaisen, and over a successful track record over the last 7 years, we became the largest financial provider in the cryptocurrency industry. So last year, we also applied for the banking license to become a fully regulated Swiss bank in the next upcoming month. Now, the timeline in this regard can extend, of course, between 6 to 12 months. So the main offering on our side is actually a hybrid strategy where we cover the retail demand on a fully automated solution and institutional investor with a personalized solution approach from the entire client interaction to tailor the demand.
Great. So David, I've been a diligent reader of your Fundstrat piece on BSV use cases. For me, it was outstanding because it was the very first report that I've read across all protocols, which focuses really on companies building. And no one sells the internet. We sell businesses building services and offering utility on the internet. So just to draw an analogy, I think it felt extremely tangible to read this report. And it's easy to take this piece and present it to investors in the space, because for many, it's very abstract topic. So what is your general approach to research, and how might BSV differ in this case?
Thanks for that. And I appreciate that you enjoyed the report. I think from my perspective, in terms of our research, we take a bottoms-up fundamental approach with many of the projects that we see in the industry and in the space, and with Bitcoin SV in particular. So I think that from that bottoms-up fundamental approach that I'm looking at over understanding the business use cases, understanding the long-term value drivers, just like you would understand the company and the earnings and the revenue, and what that does for the asset and for the value as an investor, we take a similar approach. And if I think about many of the, as you mentioned, businesses being built on Bitcoin SV, I think you're right. It is misunderstood kind of how the technology is applied. And I thought that was something that we felt was important to bring out. In terms of what it means for Bitcoin SV, I think that you guys are taking a very unique approach. Everyone in the space is also doing something a little different. I think that's great because like the internet, we're tinkering, we're trying to figure out what the right model is. And I think that some people think there'll be one solution that emerges. I think it's possible, but I also think that it's also possible that we get a lot of different niche, use case specific type of very, very powerful players that emerge. And I think that you guys are doing some very interesting things with the way you're approaching it to enable some business use cases across a number of different industries. And I'm very excited to see how that unfolds.
Fantastic. Luca, can you share some more insights with us how Bitcoin Suisse does research?
Absolutely. So on our side, we have the research department that is led by Dr. Raphael Huber on our side. So we basically have a couple of various business streams in this regard. We have a bi-weekly literature piece, the so-called Decrypt on our side, where we cover the latest technological advances in the crypto space. On top of that, we do some individual research on interesting topic, such as one of these was the Bitcoin SV research report that we also issued. And we have our main publication once a year, the outlook for the biggest events that are upcoming in the next year.
I can't wait for BSV to be part of this. Joshua, if a newcomer comes to the digital asset industry, what is the approach you take to get them started on learning and educating themselves about the different protocols and the utility they provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the approach when we're dealing with a new client really depends on the nature of the business, the kind of approach to investing that they take. So there's certainly a lot of people that come to us that take more of a retail investment approach, right? Guys that are sort of allocating their personal wealth. And a lot of times, they spend a little bit of time thinking about they're willing to take a little bit more risk. They're willing to sort of try to understand which protocols are likely to be long-term successful. They look at a lot of things like community engagement. They see kind of like the social media around different projects. And I think those are all useful things to kind of think about, right? On the flip side, if you think about kind of how long-term investors and sort of institutional investors approach the space, it tends to be very concentrated on the large cap token holdings, like the sort of Bitcoins, BSVs, ETH, those types of names where they've demonstrated some permanence, they've demonstrated some store value thesis sort of use case that as more and more sort of financial users of those assets emerge, it's sort of a self-sustaining and sort of self-reinforcing trend. So I think it really depends on the mentality of the investor and kind of what they're looking for. But obviously, once you get past that stage of sort of educating them about the different assets, there's a longer education process about how to trade it, how to get liquidity, how to manage an order that's outsized relative to market liquidity, how to store those assets, whether it's like using Genesis as a custodian or another firm. And then sort of how to manage that position over time, right? In terms of obviously crypto moves around a lot. There's a lot of volatility. You want to protect your downside. You want to hedge. You want to generate yield on it. Do you want to lend it out? Do you want to overwrite it with calls? Things like that, where you can sort of maintain that position over time. And those are all kind of things that us and the other panelists that are speaking here, I'm sure all of our firms are sort of focused on educating people that there are financial tools that you can use similar to like traditional markets in crypto.
Yeah, no, it's very well understood. I mean, the topic is complex, in particular from anyone who looks from the kind of outside in. So all the work your companies do is very much appreciated. I was notified that we have Stéphane back, so I let him answer the question that I posed earlier. So Stéphane, how does FRNT Financial help its investors, and what coverage have you done on BSV so far, if I may ask?
Yeah, sorry about that. So our communication with our investors is very often real time. So we'll provide intraday commentaries on large market moves, which has been very common within the BSV ecosystem. In addition, some of the exchange dynamics are a little bit more complicated with BSV, so that's taken a lot of explanation with our clients and in addition to that, we put out daily sales notes where BSV, just being a very topical coin, has come into our fold many times. I think that just with the amount that we've drafted in BSV over the years, just the explanation of the general philosophy behind the coin and how the financing and all that has been a big part of our discussions with investors generally.
Thank you. Luca, are there any key criteria which you look at when trying to differentiate between the different protocols?
From a company perspective, we're not an active investor in this regard, but what we see, of course, also from our biggest investors, one very crucial part for the large holders to enter the market is definitely market capacity provided by the liquidity in the market. So not only offer we the market the sourcing of the liquidity that we can provide across the exchanges, which is just one crucial aspect, but the critical long-term criteria of their crypto investment differentiates on their portfolio holdings, which in most cases we're not fully aware of in this regard. But we see them mainly focusing between still multiple targets that we all know from the famous trilemma, be it scalability, security, or decentralization, which are always key drivers for their investments, what we see.
Okay. So, many people actually don't know, but what drove me into the industry was that I, together with the team, also started building, because I felt it significantly steepens my learning curve as I, can try, test, experiment, building on Bitcoin. And it's really the performance and the efficiency that brought me then to Bitcoin SV and made me join this team to learn more. So, David, how do you performance measure things like scalability or transaction fees? Do you think investors are already looking at such KPIs? Does it matter today to them?
Well, I think yes, it must matter to some extent. I think that from again, to back up, I think it's important to think about what the use case is and where it's being used. I think ultimately none of this technology will be valuable unless it solves a real problem for people in a way that is useful to them and they're willing to pay for that. And I think when you can do that, and I think there's many projects like Bitcoin SV that are doing that in unique ways. And to your use case in particular, as opposed to something that's trying to be more of just a very big transaction flow, very high fee thing, or different types of networks. I think transaction fees for what you're trying to enable are absolutely pivotal if you're going to do the use cases you are. And I think that type of scalability is key. If you're going to have businesses develop these new types of applications, and as the market grows for that, I think that demand and value should grow over time. If assuming you can continue to attract users, businesses, and activity on the network.
Brilliant. Joshua, we have seen the ICO craze, then initial exchange offerings, and more recently the hype around DeFi on Ethereum, this brings a lot of attention of kind of the outside world to the digital asset investment space. How do you help, though, your investors to differentiate between, tokens that are kind of, less of a sustainable project versus those that have real potential?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, right? There have been many sort of market cycles. In crypto, everything tends to be very compressed and sort of like 10x speed. So yeah, I think DeFi is sort of the latest sort of bubble, if you will, something that is attracting a lot of attention, a lot of investment. And ultimately, there's going to be a lot of good technology that comes out of it, but there's also going to be a lot of failed projects and things that are down 99% at the end of the day. I think the types of things that make a project useful and successful and I think value additive are things like adding transparency, right? So projects like the lending protocols that you see today. Lending is certainly a corner of the market that Genesis is sort of like a big centralized lender, right, to the space. And we've always been sort of very, very involved there. And I think for us, we see it as beneficial to see a lot more transparency and it creates a lot more volume and transaction flow for us as well. You see a lot of people interacting across different liquidity pools to us as well. I think it can only be beneficial to get more of that just because there's more involvement. I think another way to create value is to return sort of fees and revenues back to users, and you kind of see that through phenomena like yield farming, things like fees accruing in liquidity pools, things like that. Those are all things that will create value for the ultimate users of a product. And then I think the third thing that gives a project durability is just its composability with other projects in the ecosystem, right? So that's why this idea, whether it's on ETH or BSV, this idea of multiple projects that are interacting on chain and using the data that's available and the code that's available to other projects in a kind of interlocking way. I think that's very powerful, and it's really the big driver, I think, of most of the innovation of 2020.
Yes, I very much agree. Stéphane, so we have recently seen a trend that increasingly BTC was wrapped in Ethereum. And just yesterday, someone from the BSV community put forward a proposal how to wrap Ethereum in BSV. It seems like there is a push towards gaining efficiency. How do you follow this trend? How do you perceive it? And why is it that investors might still, or builders might still refrain from building on BSV directly? What do you think is it that holds them back?
I think that there's one of the biggest pitfalls of crypto investment is just getting attracted to the latest shiny object. We saw it a lot in some of the large protocols that came out in 2017 and 2018, and then again with the ICO craze, and we're definitely seeing it again in DeFi. And I think for an ecosystem like BSV, what's really important is while there's some trends that you can look to make sure you're not missing out on if there's real innovation happening, really focusing on what on the vision, I think is one of the strengths of the BSV ecosystems, as opposed to some of the other ecosystems where something quick happens, some hyped coin comes in, and everyone shifts their focus to this trend that might be up and down within a 6-month period. And really, that's how you see good projects start to pivot away from different items. So I personally something like a wrapped BTC doesn't really strike me as a major innovation. I think a lot of it has to do with people wanting to get all of their assets towards some of these yield farming protocols, which I think are very dangerous trades in a lot of circumstances. So something like a wrap, some of these wrapped, I'd just be very careful that when you see something just explode with assets, to take that in this space that's a sign that this is something that is sustainable for the long term. I mean, there's so many false positives in crypto on this side, and I tend to think a lot of what we're seeing in DeFi and wrap BTC being one of them is such. So I'd be careful at allocating resources away from the existing path and towards that.
Yes, I mean, based on my own experience, having meetings with investors from inside and outside the industry, I think the vision is often aligned. but the way of how to get there and what it takes, there we have a different opinion. It almost feels like people hold portfolios of, a ton of intranets and not really recognizing yet the value of one single global data network, i.e. the internet, just to draw an analogy. But this is my view. I'm just wondering, Luca, what can be done to drive a focus more on building utility, building real use cases on the protocols?
Mm-hmm. I think an important part is also what Joshua mentioned before, that the crypto industry can actually sometimes be at 10x warp speed in their entire business cycles. So there, of course, it's definitely a beautiful landscape for a high volatility asset for short-term traders with a short investment horizon. So to actually target the interest of the long-term investors and the fundamental investors, to actually look on the underlying objectives, how they value the long-term intrinsic, if we want to say intrinsic value of the protocol, that has to start not only with research, but definitely also from the blockchain system itself. It would drive the value upwards if we have nice user interfaces that gather all the data that already is existent on the blockchain to transparently make it available for researchers, data analysts, and investors to do their own research with a nicely aggregated data package that would be available for them and tools to fit the screening.
Fully agree. It's certainly a nice data on-chain use case. David, in your discussions with qualified investors, and I understand it's primarily qualified investors you talk to exclusively, has there been interest on investing into ventures as well?
Yeah, I think that if you look back at the history of crypto as it's emerged in the industry, I think that, early on, the focus was much more heavily on, okay, let's invest on companies around this ecosystem. That's where you saw the Coinbases, you saw the Krakens, you see the infrastructure businesses getting built, to support the space. And as opposed, from at least traditional investors generally, not retail, who've kind of more gravitated early towards the digital crypto assets themselves. And I think that, both parts of these ecosystems will grow together, and they have. You've seen as one part grows, the other part tends to grow, and it's kind of self-fulfilling on each other. And I think just like investors have their public market exposure to equities or liquid bonds, and they have their private equity exposure and their venture exposure, I think that the same dynamic will unfold with this industry over time, where people take a portfolio approach to how they manage that exposure to the industry and the growth overall. And I think that that's probably the wise way to do it, because as you go through these different cycles, the boom and bust cycles obviously affect the companies, but valuations in the private market don't change the same way. Businesses continue to build steadily, and if you don't have that same liquid market dynamic, I think that it's a good way to manage volatility, to manage a portfolio of assets. So I think both are useful, and we're seeing interest in both. But one thing that I do think is more interesting today is we are seeing more interest from mainstream investors in the liquid side, and I think that I think that'll continue to grow as education does as well.
I see you nodding, Joshua. Is this an experience you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking, I think we're all very fortunate to work in this industry where crypto in particular just draws from so many different corners of, old world finance, right? Like we're all in some ways like venture capitalists. We're all in some ways like macro discretionary traders. We're all in some ways like systematic quant traders. And like our day-to-day is a mixture of all those things because the asset class itself is very nascent. And you kind of have to by necessity, right? You have to understand yield curves. You have to understand, how to trade illiquid assets. You have to understand, macro dynamics and monetary policy and things like that. And then you have to understand, things like tokenomics, right? Things like how to seed stage investors into some new token impact, supply coming out, 3, 6, 9 months, 12 months out, and how that'll impact price dynamics. So things like that. are part of the repertoire for any trader, investor in the space, and it's great. I mean, it's great. It's just a great industry to be in.
Lovely. Stefan, looking forward, kind of in the near term and also long term future, what is your expectation? How will the digital asset industry evolve?
It's a big question. Yeah, I mean, I think right now that there is still kind of a poly chain versus single chain debate going on. I think that's very real. I mean, it's come up a couple times in this panel, and I think that a lot of what will be decided is will come of the space will iterate from that. You know, whether or not there's really one network that evolves and then there's other solutions built on top of that network, or whether it's a polychain network system that evolves. I think that's still kind of the core debate that's happening in terms of what the digital asset space looks like. Because coming off of that, I think that you'll really start to see whether or not on-chain operability gets built, or whether or not it's kind of a layer 2 solution that gets built, which will really be the key drivers in terms of what this looks like. I mean, you look at something like the Ethereum ecosystem right now, it's very contradictory to itself. At the same time that the core development team looks to be moving to a proof of stake model next year, all of the coins that are rallying related to Ethereum, or a big chunk of coins that are rallying related to Ethereum, are layer 2 solutions. So even amongst the protocol, they haven't decided really which way that they're going to go, let alone the ecosystem as a whole. So I think that that's really going to be the decider of how the space looks.
Yes, I think a lot of uncertainty still. Joshua, do you want to share some final thoughts around your expectation for the future of this segment within the digital asset industry?
Yeah, I mean, I expect the trend towards decentralization to continue. I think even expanding to like other instruments, more derivatives on chain, maybe even a trend towards DEXs being more heavily used than centralized exchanges. Like a new story just came out actually before this panel about BitMEX and kind of the DOJ and the CFTC cracking down against some of the founders there. I think that will have a negative impact on centralized venues for sure, and that could bleed over more into decentralized venues.
Luca, your final thoughts around what does the future bring for Bitcoin Suisse besides the banking licensing?
Absolutely. I would like to actually add on to Joshua's point here directly. In addition to the decentralized venues, I think the centralized venues still have a valid point in the future, but only if they fully confirm and are regulatory compliant. So I think we will go in a binary choice where you're either fully decentralized or centralized, but fully properly regulated, like Patrick said, and where we're aiming to become a Swiss bank and security dealer as well in the future, to offer services that are properly audited, and we're not speculating on a smart contract for yield farming to earn 1000% APIs, because that pricing has the underlying smart contract risk priced in. So I think it will go in a binary decision where the centralized institution have to be fully compliant and regulatory conform.
Okay. And Stefan, how does FRNT Financial position for the future, and what do you expect?
Well, I really think that the real untapped opportunity in crypto continues to be around these institutional asset managers, and that word has kind of become, very heavily used. But I mean, the reality of the situation is that, from all of us that work on the sell side in traditional finance, none of our old clients are trading crypto on a regular basis. So I think that institutional participation, will not only bring in a huge amount of capital into the space, but it'll also bring around, much more policing of spreads on a regular basis. It'll reduce volatility, and it'll really be able to move the ecosystem into that next phase where, person on the street feels comfortable holding coin in their pocket because they feel as though it's reasonably priced, and they're not going to, see some hugely volatile swing that reduces their wealth. And I think that institutional investors play a large part in that. So that's what we're trying to do at FRNT, get them involved.
Very well put. I mean, I think we can thank all of you for the valuable service that you do, because you draw attention to a fairly new evolving space, and capital is always a start. So thank you for your time, gentlemen. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'm looking forward to the next speaker. Thank you.
Build your future on BSV with TAL, a world-class blockchain infrastructure and service provider, helping companies to build applications and services on the Bitcoin SV network. Led by industry experts, built on a solid foundation for sustainable business growth. Direct transaction submission, fee transparency at standard and volume rates. Regulated and publicly traded, TAL brings an unparalleled level of compliance and regulatory standard that private processors and operators can't offer. Build a business today that will succeed tomorrow with TAL. Discover more about TAL today at taal.com.